Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. And if you, like me, have ever wondered what the word transformational means in leadership, well, wait no longer, because today's guest, Nick Jankel, will help us with all things transformational. Now that has set you up for great success, Nick.
You're listening to the Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
So welcome to the Leadership Enigma, Nick Jankel. How are you?
I'm great, feeling buzzed up by that music.
You can't help, can you, but feel buzzed up with that music. So I know you have to sit through that, so my apologies.
I'm thinking, am I a rising star or have I made it? I don't know.
Do you know what? It's interesting. I did a podcast a couple of days ago where I played that intro on my new gadget here, which you know about. And it was funny. I could see the guest also looking and thinking, which one of those am I? So I don't know. Where would you put yourself? What category do you fall into? Rising upstart, disruptor, experienced lead? I don't know. All of the above?
Yeah, a bit of each, I think. I've always liked to keep a bit of, I'm always a disruptor in terms of innovation, in breaking rules.
Yep.
But I guess I'm also getting more and more seasoned as a few of those grey hairs start to tweak into my beard, and have had some success along the path. So, trying to keep it all, a bit of all those plates spinning.
So let's start with you. So give everyone just a little overview or introduction to you, because, you and I met at an event where I know you were a keynote speaker for us, and that was amazing. But I know you do keynotes and you touch upon motivation, inspiration, innovation, leadership, and of course, transformation. But how would you describe what you do right now to the listeners?
So right now, I definitely major on this idea of transformation. And I look at that from a point of view of transformational leadership and working to help leaders become more transformational. I also work in transformation of individuals, so personal transformation. And actually, that's one of the places where leadership and personal development collide, is in self-transformation. How do I transform my own patterning, my habits, my thoughts, my moods, my emotional reactivity, my sense of who I am inside me at 3 a.m, 10 at night.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I've got to now. And yeah, I manifest that in keynote speaking. I do a lot of keynote speeches, even during lockdown. There's a lot of virtual keynote speaking going on, surprisingly large amounts of virtual keynote speaking going on. Leadership programs is a core thing. But I'm also, I talked about the innovation thing. I'm also looking always to push on the way we deliver transformational experiences into the world. So about to relaunch a product I first created 15 years ago, which is a peer-to-peer leadership coaching experience. So really saying, you know what, you don't need to be a coach. You need to be a human being, and we'll give you some tools, some frameworks, some context, some rules, tips, whatever, and you guys can have an amazing peer-to-peer coaching experience. So that's a lovingly created innovation. It's quite disruptive. Even now, after 15 years of developing it, it's quite disruptive because it doesn't have there's no, what's it called? There's no coach with a 5-year degree in the mix. There's just 2 human beings.
Okay.
And pushing into some AI and VR stuff as well, which is always quite exciting.
Well, that puts you into the disruptor category for sure.
I like to think so.
We're going to talk about transformational leadership and actually what does that mean? I think that's such a good question for this episode. But let's go backwards before we go forwards. You didn't start as a transformational leadership expert. Your life started very differently. So just give us an idea of the journey to get you here.
Well, in all good narrative storytelling processes, where I started off and where I got to are actually almost like the same thing, but
right.
Really weird journey to get there. So I actually started my professional life wanting to be a medic. So I went to medical school, and I really wanted to be a psychiatrist. And there you can start to see where transformational leadership and psychiatry have quite a lot of overlaps.
Okay.
But I didn't know that at the time. You know the old adage, everyone's got 20/20 hindsight. It's easy to make a story. Well, it's not actually that easy, but that's another conversation. It's important as a leader to join the dots of your story, your own story, because then it helps people understand where you can take them. And so I through actually writing books, have worked out that I realized I've kind of been doing the same thing in just totally different ways. So I went to medical school, wanted to be a psychiatrist, ended up spending a year studying philosophy of science, which blew my mind, because that was when I started to realize that there were people who were studying essentially what we would now call disruptions, or revolutionary thinking was created. How did we go from Newtonian physics to quantum physics? That was like a massive shift of mindset. And we had all the data for years, but people didn't have the mindset to see it in a different story, right, basically. And so I studied that, and I was like, oh my God, this is so much more interesting than working in the mental health system to me at the time. Left medical school and ended up skipping into an ad agency that was working with disruptive brands. That was their main thing. Again, all this was not like planned. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go for this one ad agency that's special.
Always the best way, Nick.
Exactly. It was all just sort of happened. And then within 2.5, 3 years of doing working as a strategist in an ad agency, I started my own company, which again started off as a kind of helping tech disruptors grow, and ended up being a full service innovation agency, helping work Microsoft, Disney, whatever, develop business models, basically disruptive business models. And then that's when everything pivoted, because I then realized that we developed a really, and it is, and we still use it, brilliant innovation process, tools, process, workshops, facilitation, guides. We created in-house innovation programs for people like Cadbury's, really amazing, state of the art. But the bit that always made the difference was whether the culture, the leadership culture, the mindsets, the heart sets, whether that was in place. And I realized that was actually a much harder thing to do than create and run an innovation process, was to get people being innovative. And that's when I started getting invited to do innovation, leadership work. And that's when I realized it touched back into my love of neurobiology, my love of psychotherapy, my love of human development. And that was about 15 years ago. And that's when I pivoted fully into leadership development.
You see, I love this, the leadership in England. I'll tell you why, for selfish reasons, because I get to talk to people who think very differently from me. I just did a boring law degree and became a lawyer, and the rest is history. But, you think in a different, I love that when you said you wanted to know the difference between, was it Newtonian something and quantum physics? It's not a question I've ever asked myself, but I'm fascinated that was on your mind at some point whilst you were studying. I think that's brilliant. So I was furiously nodding in order to try and at least look as if I knew what you were talking about. But it does take us to the subject of this episode about transformation, transformational leadership. I hear the word, I read the word. What on earth are we talking about when we're talking about transformation in the context of leadership? Because one of the things I saw from your work, and also delighted me, is that you look at leadership right across the piece. So whether it's the 19-year-old disruptor in a garage through to the CEO of a FTSE or Fortune company, it's about the application of leadership to all and everyone in a very, very inclusive way. So let me start with that incredibly wide question. What are we talking about, Nick, when we talk about transformation in this arena?
I mean, yeah, it's a wide question, and there's a number of lenses that we can look through to answer that question. I think the first start point I always like to begin is outside in, and we'll come back to inside out, because they're both beautifully important. And I would actually say in some way, transformational leadership is the harmony of outside in and inside out. Okay. We can come to that. So outside in, why transformational leadership I think is really important. It's because right now there isn't a single organization, and that includes tech unicorns who have just got a business model for the last 5 years. There's not a single organization whose existing business model, process structures, workflows, organogram, people model, talent pipeline, whatever. There's not a single organization whose model of any part of their business is staying relevant and successful for long periods.
Because of the changing environment.
Because of the changing environment. And this has never really happened before. So the statistics of that a company used to last for 75 years on average. Now it's down to under 10, it looks like.
I saw that. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. But what, for me, that's like big talk. Smaller talk, your expenses policy, your travel policy for your sales team, whatever it is, your app UX, it can't stay the same. The way you print your documents, whatever it is, nothing can stay the same because everything outside us is changing. And I actually used the words yesterday, relentlessly changing, but also ruthlessly changing.
Okay. Because
there's an evolutionary principle at stake here, which is adapt or die. And we all know that's a kind of, truism from, grade 7 science. The organisms that adapt survive and those that don't adapt don't. But what's interesting to me in the corporate world is, until recently, if you were big enough, FTSE 100, Fortune 50 type size,
yeah,
it didn't matter how fast the world was changing because you had some form of, maybe not monopoly, but you had access to means of production and distribution that were really expensive to get, essentially. So if you were making cars, it's really hard to start up a car manufacturing business. If you're in media, it's really hard to start up a radio station, right? Used to be back in the day.
Those barriers to entry.
Yeah, barriers to entry. So basically you could say, well, we know Walmart, you don't know Walmart. So our shampoo have always been sold in Walmart. So all we have to do really is do a bit of renovation, a bit of new branding, lovely new bottle, new smell, blah, blah, some ads, great. And that's what I saw at the ad industry. This is why my story is quite interesting, is that I was seeing companies used to just doing a bit of advertising as a way of reinventing their business.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what we like inside the company. We'll just do a lovely 60-second commercial and everyone will be like, yeah, you guys are amazing. And then suddenly the internet came along, which wasn't the only thing, but it's really game changer in that suddenly you could go, oh, I've just seen this website and all 100 of your people who work at your call center hate you. And some of them committed suicide. Oh, our adverts don't work anymore to make us look good, right? And that's just the big, the thin edge of the wedge, because then this internet, and not just internet, the climate change and changing generations and changing disrupted customer types, really more important than technology, start going, well, I don't really want to have to come into a bank to sign a mortgage. I've got this other app that gives me a mortgage in literally 12 seconds with a selfie of my driving license. Why can't you do that, old bank? My dad's bank that I happen to be still with, and it's so boring to move back, but hey, these guys also make it easy to move back. So that's why nothing we do, one of my start points of leadership is nothing we do stays the same level of value.
Right.
Because value is a function of how useful we are to our customers. We have to always remember that. It's one of the things I love to tell senior leaders who are very, very successful, but struggling with transformation, struggling with digital, struggling with innovation, which is, if a customer can solve the problem you used to solve for themselves, they don't need to pay you to do it. Oh, ... and customers are getting more empowered than probably most of the people in your management team, right? As in they're starting to solve their own problems faster and faster. So if your product was all about solving this problem, but that problem I've now solved for myself, or I've realized it's nothing like as important as this problem, like mental health or having a climate to still live in, it suddenly starts to become less interesting. Your product's less interesting, prices go down, margins go down, ... So that's kind of like the start point of transformational leadership, is getting that, is really realizing that.
Gotcha. Nick, it reminds me, I think it was a Jack Welch quote, wasn't it? When he said, if the pace of change externally is faster than the pace of change internally, well, the end is in sight. And
exactly right. And actually, when I was 20 something, 3, I think it was, and it was like a few weeks before I set up my first company, I was in an ad agency and I was read this thing that you may have heard of back in the day, .com day, called the Clue Train Manifesto. And it eventually became a book, but at the time it was just a website. And one of the quotes was almost exactly that, which is, markets are getting smarter faster than most companies, as in your customers.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? I suppose a lot of our organizational clients now say they want to be the disruptor and not the disrupted. But we know full well that there are some 18, 19-year-olds in a garage somewhere trying to disrupt some of the biggest monolithic clients that we know of at the moment. And long may that continue, but that's happening.
And it's really interesting, because one of the things that I like to remind people is Instagram, for example, multi-billion dollar business. By the time it was sold, it only had 9 employees. And one of the things I love to do is look around a room of 40 leaders and say, how many groups of 9 are there? Oh, 4. So within a year from now, which is how long it took them to sell their company, you could create $4 billion businesses if you were operating with the same mindsets as these people, because these people didn't have access to the same levels of capital and widgets and, I don't know, tooled up manufacturing plants that you've got access to. So in fact, it should be easier for you because you've got loads of cash, and you can get more cash from the city or from Wall Street if you want it, right? Because you are X brand. So what's missing? And that's transformational leadership, ultimately.
You know what? I took a group of pharma executives a couple of years ago, Nick, to Silicon Valley, and they are $1 billion entity within the pharma sector. And they met a number of what I would call kind of health tech entrepreneurs, and they had nothing to their name. They were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in their teams, and they were scrambling around for money.
Halfpenny, as we used to say.
Yeah, but you know what? They actually put the executives to shame, and they felt very humbled, because what they came away and said was they have no resources, but their resourcefulness is off the chart.
Exactly. And that's really where we can now go back into the inside out conversation. So that's the outside in. Like, as a leader, what am I looking at on the horizon, where we have to pay attention to this thing, and we can't just leave it for someone else, and we can't just pretend it's not a thing. And the great news is there's loads of those at the moment. Digital is one, obviously, pandemics and sort of health system breakdowns and political instability, another. Very looking forward to watching the 13-minute film that the Senate was shown yesterday about the Trump impeachment. So that's kind of like happening, right? This is live.
Right. Yeah, the world is slightly bonkers.
All outside in, and then inside out, we've got to have resourcefulness, right? Because we don't always have the resources we need. In fact, I don't know any exec who goes, "Yeah, I've got the board's just giving me a blank check, mate. Let's go and innovate," right? You have to fight for every penny, every dollar, every whatever, and you've got to do a business case. And one of the great joys of my life is when people say to me, it's about 20 years now of running innovation programs, people say to me, can we have a business case for the thing that we're going to develop in the innovation program? I'm like, but if we knew what the answer was, we wouldn't need to do the innovation program. So we can't do a business case for the future of something that we haven't invented yet. It's one of the great conundrums of transformational leadership, right? Is you've been trained to have the right answer and to have the rules and to have a business case, which is basically an expression of the right answer.
Old school thinking. Old school thinking, huh, Nick? Old school thinking.
Exactly. And then we're trying to create the new answer where we can't create a business plan for the future. Anyway, I digress. So the inside out story is like, okay, so what do I have to bring to this party? The party's happening, can't get away from the party. And either I'm going to be like, the wallflower at the party, and I'm going to stare at the wall and no one's going to talk to me, or I'm going to be the really boring person who speaks over and over again about themselves. Enough about me. What do you think about me? Is the
enough about you, more about me.
Exactly. Is what am I going to bring to this party, and what have I got inside me? What do I need to develop inside me? And that's really where I love to then sort of go, which is we all have so much more than we think. But it doesn't happen by accident. It takes relentless, and I'm going to use the same words. It takes relentless and ruthless self-development to become the resilient, creative, innovative, agile, adaptable, emotionally intelligent, wise, collaborative, but also can get stuff done when I need to, ... leader that I think is what this moment is calling for.
It takes a lot of effort, doesn't it? I had John Amici on the show, and he said that leadership is energy expensive. And what you're describing is that kind of personal development is energy expensive. It's not going to come naturally.
Energy and time expensive. And I'd also say it's actually real world money expensive, because one of the things that we learn after many years of working in business is anything that happens has to have a budget attached, otherwise it doesn't happen. So if you say to your leaders, I want you to be reflective for an hour a week, and I want you to coach each other, and I want you to also do some innovation, blue skying, that has to take some time, and time is money. So it is intensive. One of the things I love to do in the beginning of a leadership development program is to say, stand up if you've been given, let's just say given, more than 10 hours of education on how your brain and body works. Bear in mind, we've only got one tool to influence the world, right? And it's your brain and your body, which we call in our work your body mind. It's one thing, not two things. You've got one vehicle to effect all the change, adaptation, innovation, and transformation you want to. And how have you had 10 hours of lectures, lessons from school, whatever on it? And most people say no. What about 100 hours? What about 1,000 hours? What about 10,000 hours? The mythical 10,000 hours.
Yeah, the mythical 10,000.
Well, there you go. That's why you're not a virtuoso at your own self, because you haven't spent much time on it. And that's just a simple equation. So that, again, people often ask me, how come you're X, Y, and Z, and you're a keynote speaker, and then but you're also there, and you do some TV, and then but you all seem to have a really great relationship with your wife. And I say, because I spend enormous amounts of time looking at myself and changing my own ugly bits, what I call foibles and fragilities. And I spend loads of time talking to my collaborators, partners, wife, whatever, sorting out our interpersonal stuff so that we can collaborate smoothly. But that takes enormous amounts of time. And if you don't want to do that, don't expect the equation to work for you.
And courage and vulnerability,
all
and
those things,
introspection and self-reflection.
Exactly.
I could keep going, right? But this is energy expensive.
And those take energy and time, and they take focus. Like, you've got to be more courageous. Often a big issue in transformational leadership, in innovation, is actually, I don't know if I've got the moxie and the chutzpah to go to my boss and say, I want this budget, or let's go over here and explore this area, right? And that's just emotional courage. It's an emotional facet of ourselves, but it can be developed. It doesn't just come from nowhere. Maybe there are a few people who are just natural born transformers. I don't personally know any, but maybe there are. Everyone else I know has had to work hard on themselves to be transformational.
Now, Nick, I'm going to ask you what you mean by triple threat, because I know you've mentioned that before in some of your keynotes. But before I get to that, I can't ignore the fact that we're still in lockdown and trying to see the end of a global pandemic. And hell, let's never waste a good crisis. So with pandemic in mind, have you seen any evidence that the pandemic has forced leaders into a different way of operating, into a different way of thinking, or into a different way of acting in order to think differently? Have you noticed any changes forced by the current situation?
Yes and no.
Okay.
And I think that maybe there are two different broadly responses to this puppy that we've had to deal with. One is, this is an amazing moment to reflect on myself, my own purpose, what I want to do with my life, who am I as a leader, where do I want to work, what kind of projects do I want to work on, and from the corporate level, what about our business needs to change, and we might as well do it now, because this is the moment, right? So that's kind of one mindset, and that's what I would obviously call the adaptive transformational mindset. Yep. The other is, when can I go back on holiday? When can I get into the office? Just let's do more of the same but faster kind of version.
Yeah.
And I've seen both, and that's a very natural way of engaging in complexity and crisis.
And a mix of the two, no doubt.
And a mixture of the two. I mean, I think we've all had that kind of, let's do some reflection. But can I just go and have some time with my friends? Whatever it is that it's important to us. When will this thing bloody end? It just goes on forever. And it could reality check is it could well go on for a lot longer than any of us want.
No, stop. I'm forever the optimist, Nick. I refuse to believe it.
Well, that's actually, I'm going to pick up on that, because I wrote an article a blog at the beginning of the lockdown, because people were looking at my feed and going, God, you're pessimistic. And I said, no, I'm not at all. I just want to be reality of what is the reality of what's going on here. It's just like before we even knew about social distancing, all that sort of stuff. So I ended up writing articles saying, do not stay positive in a pandemic. And basically it was a bit of a bait and switch. Of course we want to be optimistic. Of course we want to see what's possible. But leadership is not about hoping for the best. It's about being really clear with what is. Because then when you're clear on what is, you have a much better capacity to be resourceful about what might be, But if we keep pretending to ourselves that it's all going to go back to normal, and actually climate change is not really a big thing, and actually our customers are going to stay with us, they're not going to die. No, it's all going to be okay. It doesn't help. So we don't want to be pessimistic, but I think we want to be able to, lock gaze with the threats, the triple threats.
I'm going to come back to the triple threats, but you also said something I think is really interesting, because the pandemic at some point will be over. We will navigate our way through Brexit, but then there will always be something else. But some of those other things are actually globally important. As you say, we talk about peace on the planet, and we talk about poverty on the planet. We talk about climate change on the planet. We may not have a planet, Nick. Totally. So it's about getting some perspective on this, but this is never going away. There's always going to be something to disrupt us that we have to navigate around, through, over, or we just have to get to grips with and say, this is the new normal. I'm not sure I like that phrase, but you know what I mean when I say that.
I do. I've done keynotes on the new normal.
That's another episode.
One of the things I think, this is why I find enormous amount of compassion for myself, actually, Start Point, and my clients, because if you're over a certain age, and I'm probably in a leadership role, whether it's officially called a senior leader or whatever, not important. We grew up in a world that it was changing, but we kind of knew how to deliver a good X. And X is the product, service, whatever that you deliver.
Great widget.
Yeah, a widget. And our boss had been doing it for a while, our boss's boss, and we could learn from them. And we might change a few bits and bobs, but things were quite stable, relatively. And I think one of the things that I think we have to, the new normal is continuous transformation. That's the new normal, right?
That's daily, hourly.
What's that?
Daily, hourly, continuous.
Daily, hourly.
It's not, let's revisit this once a month. Exactly. It is continuously.
If you wrote up on a whiteboard all your products, all your processes, all your procedures, policies, programs, projects. I like my alliteration. And you had like 100 of them on this whiteboard, and you look at each one and you look through the lens of maybe this triple threat, digital, what's changing, disruptive customers and users, employees, customers, consumers, and damaged world, pollution, biodiversity loss, climate change, sea level rise.
That's the triple threat, is it, Nick? Sorry to interrupt you. The three you just mentioned, is that the triple threat?
That's the triple threat, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, just so the listeners are clear that.
Yeah, it's just a tool. The triple threat is I call it the 3D futures framework. It's just a way of, the level of complexity we have in the world right now is so much, and our brains weren't evolved to deal with this much complexity, right? And I love complexity, and I believe part of transformational leadership is fully engaging in complexity. But in order to make sense of things reasonably quickly, innovate a solution, and execute, we have to simplify the complex, but never be simplistic. And so the 3Ds, digital, disrupted, damaged, is a tool that you can look at just 3 lenses rather than 512 trends and 3,000, strategy, facets.
I like 3. I'm a simple guy.
Yeah, three, like digital, exponential technologies, AI, blockchain, blah, blah, blah. There's enough of those, 3D printing, machine to machine learning, whatever. Disrupted, which is my favorite, which is changing generational needs and desires and wants and habits and flavors. And then the third is all the things that you said, which basically question whether we're going to have a world or not. So the existential risks that we all face, right? So those are the 3Ds. And if you put all your products and services up on the wall and you looked at them through these 3 different glasses, say, you would realize that almost all of them would be flashing, going, you must transform me. You must transform me.
Yeah, warning.
Out of date, obsolescent, irrelevant, redundant. As an interesting, I love the word redundant because it kind of explains what it means as a leader. If your redundancy is you just don't have a role here. You don't have a fit, right? I should be really clear about all this. I am totally believe that all this transformational need is nothing about being good or bad. It's just about fitting a changing world. It's value neutral in terms of it's not a good person to be transformational. It's not bad. It's just that if we want to be of value, we have to transform ourselves. If we want to have products that are of value and people pay for them, we have to transform them. So, but the challenge we've all got is we can't give that much attention to all those different products, processes, procedures, policies, and transform ourselves and be resilient and have a relationship outside of work and have children and nourish them, because what's the point if we're not doing that? And so we have, it's a lot. It's just basically a lot. And so this is where that deep inner resourcefulness comes, because we have to choose some of the things, let go of others, be okay with some stuff starting to fade and be painful. But you know what? We know about it. It's just, we just can't get to that right now.
And be comfortable with it.
And be comfortable with the massive incompletion. Actually, one of the things
or
that
comfortably uncomfortable. Was that a phrase?
Comfortably uncomfortable, and be okay with emotional discomfort. And I think that's actually one of the things that I think is down to connect that back to an outer reality. If you think about modern capitalism, most of it has been about creating comfort where there was no comfort. Comfort and convenience is basically the 20th century. Oh, you wanted to go to Spain? Oh, now you can do it for 100 quid. That's comfortable and convenient. You know, you wanted to have headphones. Now you don't have to have a wire, and they cut out some sound here. ... And one of the things I think we're all going to have to get really okay with is this discomfort and being okay with the discomfort. But also my sense is that for us to have a regenerative environment, a world that works, you know, food systems, water systems, health systems, we're going to have to give up some comfort and convenience over the coming years. So we might as well get used to it. So we might as well get used to being okay with this product is totally unfinished, but we're going to ship it anyway. You know, the classic technology discomfort. This UX for our talent retention website, it's not perfect, but you know, we just got to get something happening. You know,
take risks.
We've got to take risks. We've got to be in
what works.
Continuous beta is one of the things I like. You know, beta is you know, continuous beta. We are work in progress. We are never perfectly. There is no such thing as a perfect, fully realized, fully unfolded leader. And to think so is madness, and it's going to cause us suffering and pain. So we've got to be okay with what my son, it's now his Netflix username, I saw the other day, is wabi-sabi, the Japanese term for the perfection of imperfection.
The perfection of imperfection. I like that.
Wabi-sabi. So when I did my wife bought me a pottery course for my birthday a couple of years ago. And wabi-sabi is when you throw your pot, you put loads of effort into it, and then one bit sort of squidges and sort of collapses a bit, right? And rather than going, oh, so annoyed, let me do it again, you appreciate that bit as the bit that makes the whole thing perfect, because it's imperfect.
I love all of that. I mean, who would you, I'm actually thinking of the film Ghost when you talk about pottery, but again, that's another episode altogether, isn't it? I don't know why.
On the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe it is.
I told you this episode could go anywhere. Is there anyone you'd point to as doing well in the transformational leadership space? Someone who embraces constant change, who takes associated risks and is comfortable with the uncomfortableness? Is it just those people that we might associate with big tech companies, or are there other people quietly doing a very good job of this?
I think actually that a lot of those tech unicorn flying to Mars type people are actually not doing a great job of being transformational. They've actually just they found a control system that works, and they are, you know, reaping the benefits of it. If you look at Facebook and its issues with ethics and social control and whatever, it's not doing a great job of being relevant. And if anyone could disrupt them, they're really open for disruption, actually.
Well, Clubhouse has just arrived on the scene, hasn't it?
Exactly. I've already thought, maybe I could live without Facebook. But Amazon, again, ethically, employment law, climate change wise, philanthropically wise, is wide open for disruption, right? So in fact, a lot of these unicorns have found a control mechanism from essentially old world thinking, but leveraging digital technologies to do it.
Right.
And you know, a lot of people don't like it. It's not good. If they could live without these things, they would. And they will do. So actually, I don't think that necessarily is where the answer has been. What happens next with these companies, I think, is very interesting. Is, you know, can you adapt your model? If you're Uber, if you're have had issues with you know, right to operate because you've got some ethics issues or whatever, can you adapt your model, which has made you vast resources, vast riches, to actually be ethically, climate change wise, blah, 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 aligned, talent and employment, all that sort of stuff. That's a really big question. But what the people who I think are the heroes of the moment are all the middle managers and VPs, SVPs, who don't get the glory moments very often, but they are relentlessly working away, chipping away to transform their organizations and play a part in the world's transformation. I very lucky to work with a lot of young leaders in my work, not just awesome senior leaders, but also 20-somethings, early 30s. And some of the resources, the relentlessness, the enthusiasm, the purpose, the thoughtfulness, the care, which is a big thing for me about transformation leadership, is caring, expanding what we care about, essentially. Blow me away, to be honest with you. Humble me in what they're prepared to do. Without all that, I get a lot of pats on the
without the baggage.
Well, without all the acclaim. I get a lot of acclaim because I happen to have found a niche where I can write books and get nice reviews, or do keynotes and get nice reviews, or do podcasts and get nice reviews. So I get quite a lot of return path from the system going, you're great, carry on. But a lot of people don't. And in fact, if anything, they get sort of negative because they're mavericks, they're difficult, they're asking questions that no one wants to ask,
And they still keep going.
They still keep going. And that's the people who when I'm designing a book or a online course or a toolkit, I'm designing for those unsung heroes.
I love to hear that. And, we chatted earlier and I said to you, the audience for this podcast was wide, because leadership is widely applicable, whether it is the 19-year-old in the garage wanting to be the disruptor, or the CEO of a Fortune or FTSE company and everything in between. And I'm comfortable with that, because I'm passionate about the inclusivity aspect and the inclusivity of leadership. So those people who are leading themselves before they lead thousands of other people.
I mean, something I often say is sometimes my little son acts more as a transformational leader than some of the people I work with on a daily basis. And leadership is a human skill, and it's our birthright. I'm actually going to go one step further.
Okay.
It's our human birthright is to lead change and help others come along the journey of change. So we evolve, right?
So I've got an unfair question for you, Nick. I'm on a roll now. I'm like, really? Now, I know some people have used the term futurist with you as well, which doesn't mean you're looking into a crystal ball, just so I can just dispel that myth. But, for all those...
Get mine out from the cupboard.
Well, if you do now, it'll be brilliant. Only I can see that. But if we think about all the many thousands of leaders that one hopes listens to this over time, what should be some of the things that they need to be aware of over the horizon? What should they be looking out for? Maybe as yet unidentified, but I know we talked about the triple threat, but are there any things that people should be alive to, regardless of whether they're the 19-year-old disruptor or the 60-year-old CEO? Any thoughts?
Oh, so many. I mean, I think obviously truism that if you don't have digitalness at the core of your business model,
it's over.
It may not be over. It's going to be very painful. I think it's going to be really painful. And I'm also, there are some things that I'm really clear on shouldn't be digital. So, when I do a 4-day workshop where we're going to really get into our heart and really transform our old patterning and really reinvent ourselves, maybe digital version isn't the best version for that. That's
I agree.
Debate to be just had, and I'm having that in our business at the moment. How far can we use a digital program to take people into really unexplored territory? That's a great question for me as a design question, right? But I think digital is really important, and particularly I'm going to say distributed digital, because the true purpose of the internet was distributed power. Right. That was Tim Berners-Lee's vision. In fact, the head of Twitter said recently, basically, that they think they're going to be disrupted because at the moment, the internet's become centralized and the internet wants to become decentralized.
Okay.
And human beings want to be decentralized. They want to be able to make decisions at their own place, in their own pace. And if you're on a customer care line, and if you're serving a customer in a retail environment, you want to be empowered to make decent, adaptive, dare I say, transformational choices. Yeah. So I think that's two things there. So one is digital. The other is, how can you decentralize whilst never making the mistake of making it a free-for-all, and it's all about consensus, because that's not transformational either. That's just kowtowing to a sort of flatness of everyone wants to be equal. I'm sorry, I am the boss. I'm the guy with the, you know, the money or the lifetime's work on the line. I'm going to make the ultimate decision, but I will be decentralized in the places where I honestly think with some support and empowerment, you can make a pretty damn good creative decision, you know.
Yeah, putting the decision making where the information is.
Yeah,
Front line.
So that's decentralized. That second thing I think is decentralized. How can we decentralize? Which is sounds not a big thing, but it's way more disruptive than it looks, because we live in a fully centralized hierarchical world where we're used to power being pulled to the center, money being pulled to the center. As you can see with that whole Robin Hood, GameStop debacle. That's basically a drama around central and distributed coming up. You know,
it is a bonkers world at the moment, or has it always been bonkers? But I've taken the blinkers off. A bit of therapy here would be useful.
I like to think in the 50s and 60s, I don't think it was as bonkers as it is. But, you know, when you see some movies set in those times, there was some bonkersness going on, for sure.
Just add human beings and away you go. Now,
so the third thing I'm going to talk about on the horizon for all of us to really question is the extraction versus contribution dynamic. And when I mean extraction I mean extractive industries that take from the ground, take from societies, they take money, they take value, they take energy, they take oil, and then they leave a lot of pollution or mental health pollution, you know, to stretch the analogy. And one of the things I'm very interested in, I actually have a second business all about this, is how do we create businesses that are regenerative, that actually give more than they take and leave the world better, but also make a decent living, a decent profit. And that's going to be something I think we're all going to have to grapple with.
And I think that's a multi-million dollar pound question, isn't it, for so many large organizations? Because look, they want to make money and they want to sustainably grow, but they also want to be a force for good and consider how they give back to the communities within which they operate beyond just the product or service that they have, right?
Absolutely. And purpose, one of my things about purpose is, if purpose hasn't cost you, it's probably not purpose. If your business purpose doesn't cost you, it's probably not, it's just marketing. And I don't mean cost you like it cost you 100 grand for a purpose video. I mean, if it hasn't cost you something that you'd like to do, but you now can't.
Personally cost you.
Personally and business-wise, we can't do that anymore. We can't use that supplier. We can't work with this vendor. We can't use this manufacturing process.
Like an ethical compass, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, it is.
Right. Now, I'm loving this conversation, and I hope that you'll come back and we'll talk more, because I know there are so many themes that you are wise on, and I can be insatiably curious and just ask lots of open questions. How can people connect with you if they want to find out more? Because I also know you've written your latest book, which is Now Lead the Change. So direct people to the best place to connect.
Well, ironically, Amazon. For that book.
Well, there we go.
They've just got the best supply chain for books, basically. Now Lead the Change. It's what do you call it? It's I wouldn't say my own thing is a masterpiece. It's certainly a lot of work and love and years of experience in it. It's big. You know, it's a sort of like it's a guide to transformational leadership, and it's a lot in there. So that would be a great place. And then my website is actually, I do social media. I like LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me there, Nick Jankel, LinkedIn me. We're on Facebook, Switch On Now, all that stuff. But you know what? I love email. And so the place where you get the most up-to-date content from me is on our email newsletter. And you can get that switchonnow.com. And at the footer, you can put in your email. I will say one more thing. We run an amazing leadership program. It's for individuals, we do it for companies, but it's a program for individuals called Master Transformational Leadership. And as part of that, we run quite regular free webinars on different facets of leadership. And again, if you go into our email, you'll get heads up on that, but also on the homepage of our website, you'll have things that you can sign up for if you fancy a bit.
I'm looking at that page now, Nick, and I'm going to be signing up because I fancy some of that too. So why not? You heard it here first. Listen, I've got a couple of fun questions for you just as we wrap this up. You are an author. So one of my first questions is, what's your favorite word?
Oh my God. Word.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't know what my favorite word is, but I'll give you a word I used this morning in our coaching toolkit: awestruck.
Awestruck.
And I was like, yeah, feeling that word today.
Okay, awestruck is a good one.
Struck by awe.
And here's another question for you. What would be your best advice to a 21-year-old Nick?
Well, I would say that being cognitively brilliant and complex and intellectual is not enough. And you have to develop what I now call embodied wisdom too.
Love it. Nick, have you had fun?
I had a great time. Absolutely.
I can't ask for anything more than that. I hope that you will come back to the Leadership Enigma and we will talk and have more fun. You've been a star.
Thank you so much.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.